is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me is my great co-host Ralph Hanna. And guys, here we are. We're right in the mid-month point of August. Obviously, a lot going on in the Copa Libertadores, featuring our Paraguayan teams. We'll talk about how they did. We have to talk about some shock results also in the Copa Paraguay. What exactly was the main shock there? And of course, today officially at the time of recording, the Premier League is back. We'll talk about one transfer that happened a couple days ago that I'm sure all of us will have our opinions on in that sense. But yeah, I guess we'll go straight to you, Ralph. Obviously it's just us today. Fede won't be here. We'll be back soon. But yeah, this is going to be a really interesting, Copa Libertadores second leg, I would say. We're coming off of two interesting ties, one positive and one negative, I would say. So yeah, I guess before we analyze it all completely, I guess your first impressions of what you've been able to see in those two games. And of course, just what we've been seeing in the Copa Paraguay, in the Clausura. There's been a lot going on, man.
Yeah, we're right in the thick of it again. So hi to you, Roberto, to everybody. Poor Fede is working. It's actually a holiday today in Paraguay, 15th of August. But he's having to work because there's, Primera C games. There's so much going on. Like that's the fourth division equivalent in Paraguay. But I mean, I think what we saw with the two Copa Libertadores games was maybe I would say two teams that I had a very set game plan, and for one it worked, and for one it didn't. And for the team it worked. I'm talking about Libertad because they did get away with the 0-0 draw. Cerro were heading for that, right? Until that stoppage time penalty, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But I think in both cases you could see the way they wanted to approach the game totally different to the way they've been playing in the league, especially Cerro. But has it really worked? I don't know. It's going to be a very tough trip to Argentina, I think, for both teams, right? Because you would expect the Argentinian sides to be favorites at home. So on that side, it could be difficult. There was a one team that got a draw, sorry, that did work out for them, and that's Minga Guasu in the Copa Paraguay. So we can go into that and talk about what was an incredible result, beating Sportivo Luqueño. Um, Mingaguasu is from the Liga Paranaense. They're not affiliated to the Paraguayan FA. They're affiliated to the Rural Football Union or the Unión Fútbol Interior. We talked about some of these teams before. They're essentially amateur, semi-pro. Like sometimes the guys get paid bonuses and things. And they had knocked out Rubio New in the second round, the leaders of the Intermedia, the second division, and now they faced Luqueño. And they went ahead through this incredible strike, and it looked like they were actually going to win the game outright before Lautaro Comas scored a stoppage time free kick for Luqueño. And at that point, you thought, oh, okay, maybe just the seniority in this moment and the pressure has got to them. And I think even Luqueño scored their first penalty and Mingaguasu missed their first one in the shootout. So again, everything seems to be favoring Luqueño, but lo and behold, the goalkeeper pulled off some saves. Luqueño missed some penalty kicks of their own, and Mingaguasu are through, which is actually only the second time in the Copa Paraguay that we've seen a Primera team lose to a team outside of the APF from the rural leagues. There's a huge moment for them, and they'll face either Encarnacion or Dos de Mayo in the next round. And honestly, I mean, if they beat some Rubio New and Luqueño at this point, they could be dreaming of going even further, which would be an incredible feat for a team that, like I say, they're essentially an amateur team. They're not a professional team. They're not linked to any league. So great moment for them this week.
Yeah, huge moment. And looking at who they might play in the next round, like I said, it could be one of either Dos de Mayo or Encarnacion. So yeah, and if they're able to get results against a really, good team in Sportivo Luqueño or in the first division and getting that result, who's to say they can't be favorites in this round of 16, or not favorites, but they can definitely get a result in this one. And yeah, then I mean that really is the dream for them to really take on, like, depending on how the draw happens, but the dream is always to take on your Olympias, your Cedros, your Libertads, those kind of teams. And I'm sure all these guys here, they're the ones that looked on TV or have always been supporting them. Like, can you imagine, it's like those stories that you see in, a lot of, you know, game that I use the FA Cup as the example, but like those teams from like divisions, taking on your teams from the Premier League, and to be able to do that, I think would be incredible for them. Even if they do lose that game, like if they lose like 5 or 6 nil or whatever, but the fact that they had that chance shows that hey, if they can do it, then another team can as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just because I was when I was in Paraguay, I was watching a lot of football from these kind of leagues, these regional leagues, and it is interesting that you get a lot of players that were probably at some point in Primera in the youth teams, or knocking around the intermedia maybe, but they never became a regular player, and that's how they end up back in these regional leagues. But I think there must be a feeling of I'm as good as you because I used to train with you or I trained with people like you. And so I can, on any given day, I can be good enough. And I think you got that, you get that feeling when you watch some of these games and the Copa Paraguay is great for that, that it mixes again in these teams of the very talented, hardworking players that maybe didn't quite make it with the ones that did. And then you see these kind of moments. So, and also just something to note, I mean, it's funny, just how unknown this team is. Tigo Sports is the main broadcaster. They they tweeted the goal scorer for Mingaguasu, and it's actually the wrong player. It was
Mhm.
another player called Jose Castro. They put Alex Duarte, and SofaScore, Soccerway, all of those have picked up the wrong player. But some people were in my mentions in Twitter explaining that no, it's actually another guy called Jose Castro. So just so people understand, like how crazy this moment is that they can knock out a Luqueño that's actually playing very well in the league as well. They're doing well this season. It's just a huge moment for them and for Paraguayan football. I think it throws up once again that the Copa Paraguay has been a great tournament since it's kind of been rediscovered because they used to have it in the 90s and then they rediscovered it, what, I think about 5, 6 years ago. And so it's been a great tournament.
It's like what it says in its slogan. It's the Copa para todos. It's the Copa for everyone. So yeah, Ronnie Redis, you should better know how to say that now after all those years. But no, it's incredible. It really is such an incredible feat for them. And let's see what they do in the next round, see what they can do. And hopefully now that all of not just Tigo Sports, but everyone in Paraguay will be keeping an eye on them. And also teams that will be keeping an eye on is of course in the Copa Libertadores because we had two games that happened in this tournament. And obviously the one that's fresh from our memory was yesterday in Tujuqua was Libertad against River Plate. Libertad obviously hosting River Plate there in La Huerta over there in the first leg of the round of 16. And, it was an interesting setup, from Sergio Pato Aquino, getting the likes of obviously Will Fernandez, getting Ivan Franco, Lorenzo Mejarejo. None of the two veterans in Roque Santa Cruz or Oscar Cardoso started, which I think was expected given the fact that this team of Marcelo Gallardo was going to go all out. And ultimately, I thought this was a really good setup by Sergio Aquino. I think, they had River Plate on the ropes for quite some time. Even though they were outshot, I think 20-9 or something along those lines. I think Martin Silva, what a game he had, coming off strong at 42, denying players like, Borja, like Colido, Quintero, Druisi, a lot of those players that, Matias Galarza, who obviously we've known for quite some time, just made this move and he, obviously was going to be very expected of him. But yeah, I think the sort of impression that I got from this game was it was ultimately a really good, defensive performance from Libertad. But I think ultimately I thought Libertad should have snatched something. I think they really were in the in the makings of something, to be able to get a result. They really had a replay on the ropes there.
Yeah, I think in the first half, Libertad, I was very impressed with how good they were in the press and winning the 50-50s. I mean, because you have Galarza, who we know from Paraguay national team is very good, and then they have people like Enzo Perez. So in midfield, I mean, River have a very strong team, but Libertad were getting on top, especially Campuzano was doing well. Melgarejo was really causing problems. We talked about Melgarejo, I think last week. That he hasn't really shown up this year, but he was definitely causing some problems there. I thought Robert Rojas was very strong defensively, and this was a big moment for him, of course, because going back against River Plate, where I think things didn't work out how he wanted. So I thought overall they were looking very good. In what I just felt was they had to take that chance in the first half. There's one, I think the best chance is Fernandez, Hugo Fernandez. He manages to break through and he's almost one on one, but his pace wouldn't allow him, I suppose, to get truly one on one because there's almost a defender like shadowing him. So he has to end up shooting from distance, and Armani pulls off a really good save. I thought that was the key chance for Libertad in that first half. But in the second half, I don't know. For me, River made three changes right at halftime. I think Gallardo wasn't happy with what was going on, and particularly it was bringing on not just Driussi that maybe had a bit more movement than Borja, but it was also Quintero. I think by bringing on Quintero, that kind of gave them much more control than they saw in that first half. And they really, towards the end, I thought maybe it was River that were going to snatch it because they started to force some good saves from Martin Silva. And just to mention, I mean, why is Martin Silva even playing this game, right? It's only because Rodrigo Morínigo, who has been criticized a bit, but he got injured in the last game in the league match, had to come off. And they don't even think he'll be back for the second leg, if I remember correctly. He'll be out for a while. So Silva has to pull on the gloves again at 42. Not the oldest player on the pitch because Roque Santa Cruz came on after in the second half, and he's one day away. Tomorrow's his birthday. He's going to be 44. So, I mean, that's incredible. I think he's now the second oldest player in the Libertadores, in the history of Libertadores. They were mentioning. Um, I mean, and him turning 44 tomorrow. Remember, Patito Aquino, the coach, is only 45, so it's just a reminder of what he's still doing. And by the way, I thought when Roque came on, he did something very interesting. He played very deep, and he was just trying to link up a little bit more with the midfield and then get long passes out to Melgarejo Aguilar, someone with more legs. But he was playing a very sensible game based on his own limitations and also the way the match was going. You just felt like Libertad needed something a bit more in midfield that they'd lost from the first half because of the substitutions by Gallardo. But I don't know, Roberto, what do you think like for next week? What are your thoughts on can Libertad turn this around?
I mean, well, I think they come into that game as big underdogs, really. I think River Plate after that result, they certainly, and this is a River Plate side that has been very inconsistent, and we're not even talking about what happened in the Club World Cup, but also in the league as well. Like, I think they understand that yesterday was a missed opportunity where they knew that now they have a much bigger obligation. I'm sure the pressure will get to them heading into that game in the Monumental. And I think Libertad can take advantage of that, honestly. I think Libertad understand that they are underdogs and they can play that role sometimes. That this isn't a team that obviously is is unknown of making, big upsets. It's done that in the past. So I think it will depend really on how much they can handle River Plate, because I'm sure they're going to go all out attack next week over there at the Monumental. And I think it's just the case of, like you said, Martin Silva trying to step it up once more. I think that defense of, Vieira, Jimenez, Rojas, who I know what it likes to play at that stadium. I'm sure he's going to be able to step it up as well. But I think it also has to be with a lot of these guys like Melgarejo, like Johan Franco, Aguilar. Maybe a Marcelo Fernandez comes in and tries to start from the starting lineup, because I think they can understand. And hey, look, if they want to learn something from Inyawasu, trying to get a draw and then snatching something on penalties, so be it. So I think I still think River Plate are gonna get it eventually. I just feel like, after getting the result that they did over there, I'm sure they're gonna be more pissed as well that they need to get something over there at Monumental in Buenos Aires. So I think the best River can, I think the best Libertad can do is try to hold on, maybe snatch something right there, from a set piece or something, and then just try to, park the bus, I guess, as they say over there, and just try to, hunker it all down. I don't know. That's my feeling. I still think River Plate should win this tie, but I don't think Libertad will be out without a fight, honestly.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Libertad is they've now drawn their last four games in Libertadores. Um, two no wait, yeah, two at home and but two away, including the 0-0 with Talleres, the 1-1 against Sao Paulo. So they have kind of been able to do that so far. I've been really impressed with Patito Aquino, how he sets up the team slightly differently in Libertadores, and it seems to work, and he should know, right? Because Sergio Aquino has played more games than anybody else as an outfield player in Copa Libertadores history. So I guess he's got that experience. And yeah, I think we'll see a similar game pattern. Maybe it will be hard for Libertad, being in that stadium. That I'm sure it'll be a full sellout. There'll be a lots of pressure on River Plate to perform, and they'll probably will perform better in their home stadium. But I think we could see again an interesting setup where at least they can keep it close and see and try and snatch something. Getting a win could be hard. I think your point of penalties, we might end up seeing something similar in Argentina next week or the next game. Is it next week or in 2 weeks?
I think it's next week.
Next week. There we go.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly going to be interesting to see how this all really just goes off because obviously, they have another league game, River Plate play Godoy Cruz, whereas Libertad, I think they play a really tough one against Olimpia, coming off a Super Clásico loss as well. I mean, I think they understand as well. Like, I don't know if they really are too focused more on the league right now because they're 6 points behind. Okay, if they get the result against Olimpia, that kind of helps them in a way, and they have to depend, but they still have to depend on the likes of a Cerro, of a Guarani, those teams coming, you know, getting drop points, and Cerro and Guarani play each other also on the weekend as well. So yeah, it's a big week as well, and we'll talk about Cerro in a bit, but I think Libertad really can understand that they know the sort of obligation that they get, and they shouldn't be afraid of the occasion, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think because they've also gone to Sao Paulo this year and got the draw away, and even Talleres away. I mean, they've gone to big stadiums, managed to get results, so that will fill them with confidence. With the league, like you say, I don't think that's their priority right now. We'll probably see plenty of players rested for the Olympia game. They'll kind of sacrifice that one if they have to get everybody ready for Argentina. And I mean. Yeah, maybe one of the questions is do we see someone like Ernesto Caballero come in to the team who again is even more defensive than say playing with Campuzano and Sanabria, which we saw yesterday. But I mean, either way, Libertad have a strong squad. I think what I was most impressed by, like I said, is just the way they really set up to win a lot of duels, to be very intense in the press. And so if they can get that level of intensity again, that will give them a great chance.
Absolutely. I think it'll be an interesting tie for there in Argentina as for another tie that, well, I think is a bigger obligation for them after the result that they had, and I think can feel a bit more negative in comparison to the Libertad was Cerro Porteño, coming off a Super Clásico win, and obviously, with this big game against Estudiantes coming up, I think it really is a demonstration, I would say, that they needed to get something in this one. And, being at home and, packed crowd, you thought the occasion was good. And yeah, it was not the game that everyone expected. Certainly Estudiantes had Cerro Porteño on the ropes, most of the game. I saw a Cedro side that personally did not try to step up for the occasion. It was interesting to see Rodrigo Gomez at 19 get a start in that game as well, such an important game as well. And you're thinking, wow, he actually got the start. Juan Iturbe not really at his best as well. He said starting from the coming off, sorry, starting the game instead of coming off the bench like he's had in the past few games. I mean, it did not work out well for Cerro Porteño. I think they really were playing too defensive, and I think we're playing too conservative. And ultimately, it was a penalty from Santiago Asilar to win the game for them. And obviously Muslera had a really good game as well. We talked about two goalkeepers, two Uruguayan goalkeepers stepping out. Muslera over there in La Nueva Olla, and obviously Martin Silva last night in Tujucua. I think it really was a demonstration that Cerro Porteño had a missed opportunity in this one. They really could have gotten something there, and now they have to go and chase a result over there in La Plata next week. But you can see from some of the players on that team that, the occasion was not good for them, and it wasn't good enough for them to get anything in this match.
Yeah, it was a strange setup from Diego Martinez in that we're always, well, I wouldn't say critical, but his maybe weakness has always been that he likes to attack and he will play quite attacking, which obviously in Libertadores can be complicated. And so what we saw in the away games was, at least in the group stage, he did change that up and try to be more defensive in terms of his balance, especially of his midfield. But this was really interesting because this was something that I hadn't seen him do at all, which was put a 19-year-old Rodrigo Gomez a right back, and then the regular right back Fabricio Dominguez, he put him just in front, right? And it was an obvious plan. They were trying to stop Cetre. on the left wing and not let him cut inside and get too many chances, which did work to an extent. But I did feel that Fabricio Dominguez was really struggling higher up the pitch because that's just not his position. He's a right back, not a right midfielder, and so there was a lot of stuff kept breaking down along that flank. And then like you mentioned, Iturbe, I don't know if he was injured, he's just tired, but he didn't look very sharp for Cerro. And then you had the Wilde Vieira and Jorge Morel midfield is like that's their second choice midfield, to be very frank. They want Gaston Jimenez and they want Pires de Mota in there, but both were unavailable for this game. So they had to go with that. And that's very I mean, Wilder sometimes he can get up and down and press a bit, but Morel he's essentially a central defender that is playing in there. So you have your central defender in centre mid, you have your right back at right midfield. It becomes a very static and defensive side, and you never really thought in the first half, for example, you never felt Cerro were really going to score anything unless it came from maybe a set piece. But the same could be said for Estudiantes. In that first half, Estudiantes dominated possession, but they only had like some shots from distance. I think actually the only shot on target was Wilde Vieira for Cerro. But then in the second half, that's where I think Diego Martinez really failed in the way he read the game and his subs, because if you look at all the substitutions, none of them performed better than the starters. You had Cecilio Dominguez came off with Jonathan Torres. He didn't do much. Um, they decided to bring off Rodrigo Gomez and go back, right, and he brought on Fabricio Peralta, and he didn't have a great game. Um, Iturbe comes off for Araujo, and Araujo doesn't do much difference to what Iturbe was doing. So, there wasn't really much going on. I thought the best player for Cerro attacking was Aliceda. When he was playing on the left as well, so slightly different position. He did get some times where you felt he was stretching the defense and might do something, and they did end up forcing some good saves from Muslera. But you never really felt Cerro were really going to overpower Estudiantes or be on top in the game just because of the way they set up, didn't have possession. And so the nil-nil wouldn't have been terrible, but then you get, of course, this stoppage time penalty, which kind of spoils the whole party. I mean, it becomes the worst kind of game plan, right? If you plan for a nil-nil and you lose 1-0 with a late goal, it's now going to look really difficult for them. I think some people maybe were questioning the penalty, but for me, it seemed a clear penalty because Perez comes in behind and takes her out. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it was a clear penalty. I think, Iturbe tried to win that as well, and it felt very much kind of desperate in a way, I think, for Cerro Porteño. And yeah, I think the result really just is not the one that wants to have. And now getting the obligation of getting something over there in La Plata, which I'm sure Estudiantes will feel very confident in. I think it really will be a case of Diego Martinez just trying to tinker the squad as best as they can. I don't know. And here's the thing, I don't know if he can do it. I don't, again, they were riding on a good confidence since the Super Classico, but then since they've drawn against Nacional, now they got to take on Guarani, their closest rival for the Clausura title, and now they got this one here. It could really capitulate like that in an instant.
That's a great point that Cerro, because of this result, they do want to think about the league because they want to try and win something this year. And the likelihood now that they turn around the second leg against Estudiantes de La Plata is much lower. So should they focus more on the league and that game against Guarani, like you say, that's going to be a huge match. Guarani are coming off just beating Olympia 4-0 last week, so they're on a high. Um, and it's an ex-Cerro coach in charge, so there'll be some revenge feeling as well. I mean, yeah, if I was Diego Martinez, I'd probably play my best team against Guarani and then just try and see if they have the gas or the legs to be able to do something in Argentina rather than risk resting in this game, losing points, and then not being able to claw it back in the second leg. I mean, one thing I just wanted to mention as well, because I thought it was very unfortunate for Quintana. I thought Lucas Quintana had a great game at centre back, but he is at fault for the penalty because the ball, like it's like a through ball and he kind of stretches for it. And it's that awkward thing where as a defender you're right-footed, but you're on the left-hand side. So he wants to use his stronger foot to cut out the ball. But obviously the way the angle of your body is, you can't stretch your right leg
Mhm.
as much as you could your left. And so he does that, and he doesn't quite cut it out, and it falls to the defender, the forward, which allows them to get in the box, and then the penalties committed. But I thought, other than that moment, he was very good, and they didn't feel, or I felt that they weren't feeling the absence of Gustavo Velasquez as much as maybe we expected they would. So he'll need a really good performance again next week if that's going to kind of help them, because I think the only way I could see Cerro really going through is they need a clean sheet, right? If they concede, I don't know if I could see them scoring two. Just not from what they showed in this first leg. They never really seemed to have a sustained period of pressure when it looked like they could overpower Estudiantes. And I thought it was a shame because of the big crowd. It would have been nice if they really went for it in like the first 15, 20 minutes, right? Then maybe sit back a bit, but try and use some of that energy to really have a go and early on. But in the end, yeah, I mean, it's they still haven't scored against Estudiantes since 2011. They had 2-0 draws there. They lost 1-0 here. So maybe they'll finally get a goal. We'll have to see. But it is looking unlikely, I think, for Cerro.
So what do you say? Both of them try to get something there, one of them, or do they both get eliminated after the next week?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think maybe Libertad could do something. My optimism is more with Libertad than Cerro. But
Which is
yeah, I can't.
crazy considering Cedro have been the better team this year.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, definitely in Libertadores, Cerro have been very impressive. But what we've not really seen is them in away games being able to get a big result, right? And so this would be that what they did very well, I thought, was at home. They would score goals when they had to. But yeah, let's see. But I think if you had to make me choose, I'd say maybe Libertad, but unlikely, and I don't think Cerro can get through.
Yeah, me neither. I think both of them really end their tournament tier. Maybe Libertad, like you said, I have more optimism in that. That's me saying as a Cedro fan, but I was impressed yesterday from the performance from Libertad that it gives me some sort of hope that they can get something. But we'll see. You know how the Libertadores can be. It can be very unpredictable. So maybe Libertad and Cerro Porteño can shut us both up in terms of performances and qualify for the quarterfinals. As we switch gears now to a league that it will be starting today at the time of recording. A lot of the teams obviously waiting to get their dream of doing well. It's the Premier League. The Premier League is back, and obviously we have some Paraguayans that will be performing at the time. Obviously, we have another one that we will have to talk about now is Omar Alderete. Omar Alderete finally getting his move to the Premier League. This had just come back actually just last week after we recorded. The rumors started to circulate, and then by the end of the weekend, it was a done deal that Omar Alderete will leave Getafe and go to Sunderland. He'll join the recently promoted Black Cats, who just got promoted via the playoff in dramatic fashion, actually, from the Championship to the Premier League. And yeah, Alderete finally gets that Premier League move that had been talked about for quite some time. That given the great form that he had had at Getafe in La Liga as a whole, and obviously for Paraguay doing so well in that center back role, he finally gets a move to, one of the best league, I guess, in the world. And, obviously it's a different scenario from Getafe to Sunderland because obviously Sunderland are a team that are going to try not to get relegated. But yeah, Ralph, I love your thoughts. I have my thoughts about this movement, but I'd love to hear what you think, just overall how this works for him, for Sunderland, for Paraguayans, and yeah, I think as well, just for him getting into the best form possible heading into these qualifiers and hopefully the World Cup.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, firstly, I think it's a good move for him. I think I'm happy that he gets a chance because it was talked about in the winter transfer window that he might be going. I think maybe Everton was mentioned or some Premier League club, whatever. It didn't happen, but now he gets that chance, and I think it's actually a good fit for him because he has been in relegation battles before with Hertha Berlin, even Getafe when he first joined was bottom half of the table and more defensive side. He's used to having to do a lot of defensive work. I think he had the most clearances in La Liga last year. He's one of a handful of players that made more than 100 that won more than 100 aerial duels. So I mean, he's often in the thick of it. And one thing that Omar Alderete is being compared to a lot of other Paraguayans in Europe is he's been very consistent. He's got over 11,000 minutes. I don't know if he's hit 12,000 minutes in top five leagues of football of European football, and so no real other Paraguayan's been doing that in the same time period as him. So that's why I'm very happy for him that he gets a chance. What we really saw with him, or what I really saw with him, is he was very impressive in the Copa America. So Paraguay had an awful Copa America, but he was the one kind of player that you felt was actually playing well. He even scored a great goal against Brazil that you were
Yeah, I
there
was
to
there.
see.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
So he really started to come to the fore there, and I thought that was interesting. That showed some leadership quality that maybe we didn't know about him, because when your team's doing badly, but you're still putting in those strong performances, I think that says quite a lot about your character. So yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a good move for Sunderland because they're only paying 10 million, and there's central defenders that will cost more for sure, that wouldn't be maybe at the same quality. He's proven, he's very consistent. He's gonna make a lot of clearances, win a lot of aerial duels. So I mean, he's gonna be in the thick of it. So I think all in all, I think it's a clever signing. And then for him, it's a nice move because at this stage of his life, and we're also seeing a lot of Paraguayans starting to get tempted to go back to Brazil. Brazil has money. Brazil is also has performed well in the Club World Cup, which I think has maybe attracted players that wouldn't have gone if the Club World Cup didn't happen and they didn't see those results, because there's a feeling maybe Brazil was closer to European football in standard than people had previously thought. But to stay in the top five league, I think that's where you want to be, and so I think it's a good move for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a fun fact, actually, and I think it was kind of written in the stars. When's his birthday? December 26th, Boxing Day in England. So maybe it was written in the stars that he was going to make that move to the Premier League soon. But yeah, I think it's for him. It's going to be quite interesting. I'm actually happy for him. Him being able to take on some of the best players in the world and, be able to be used to that. Because I think for the World Cup, I think he needs to have that sort of intensity that will make him, one of those leaders like him, Diego Gomez, if Diego Leon makes it as well. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Enciso if he's able to still be in a Premier League team by the time the World Cup starts. I think it's certainly going to be interesting to see how he does. And yeah, ultimately, I think, I'm just making my prediction here. I think Sunderland unfortunately do get relegated. So I think it will be a big task for him to try to obviously, not concede a lot of goals, have really standout performances. And that, like you said, that $10 million fee, the 10 million pound fee, it's not a lot, not a big loss or a big gain. So worst case scenario, Alderete is gone after a season, which would be really unfortunate, but for the Sunderland fans. But if he does so well, that can obviously raise attention. You've seen that with, a lot of players who, leave relegated sides that obviously make the big jump to teams that are a bit more stable. So that could be a case for him as well. Obviously, we don't want that to happen, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting for Alderete, him, getting the use of playing against the likes of in the past, like your Bayern Munich's, your Borussia Dortmund's. Now he played against, teams like Barca, Real Madrid, and Atleti. Now he gets the likes of Man United, Chelsea, Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, those teams. I mean, it'll be interesting. And hey, for the first time in quite some time, and it sucks because, you got one Paraguayan that, he did play in one of those games, but it was an FA Cup game, but he never had the chance to play it in a Premier League sort of game. Is the Time War Derby, Newcastle against Sunderland. Almiron never had the chance to do it. He did it in an FA Cup game, but never in a Premier League game. But now Alderete gets the chance of playing in both those two games if he's healthy. I mean, and those are really tight games. Or I'm sure you watching, the Premier League growing up, from maybe a lot of fans that haven't had the chance to see a Time War Derby in quite some time. Those are really feisty affairs.
Oh yeah, but remember, of course, he's used to coming from Cerro and having played the Super Clásicos here. But yeah, I think that will be a great moment, and it continues. It's funny, right? It continues the Northeast love affair with Paraguayan footballers, because you mentioned Almiron, you had Gavilan at Newcastle as well. But Sunderland, of course, have now signed more Paraguayans than any other team, because they have Paulo de Silva and Christian Riveros, who, by the way, was on the bench last night at Libertad. He's the assistant of Sergio Aquino. One thing I think for Sunderland fans wondering, is this going to be similar to Paulo da Silva, who was another central defender, didn't really work out? I think it's much different because I think Paulo de Silva he'd had some time in Europe, but mostly he'd been playing in Mexico, and he came off like a good World Cup, and so people's kind of value goes up after World Cups and gets that moment. But he didn't really have the history of playing in Europe, being so consistent like Alderete, but also being in the relegation fights as well. So I think that's something we shouldn't forget. Another interesting thing about Alderete that makes him a really I think he's one of those players that can be very useful for coaches. Is he started at Cerro as a left back? A lot of people forget that. Then because he's not really mobile enough, they moved him into the middle. But he's played in a back three. He's played as a two, in a back four as a central defensive pairing. So he has all of that experience as well in different formations, different tactical styles, and I think that's also very useful for a coach because we don't know if halfway through the season things aren't going well at Sunderland, they have to end up changing their coach and they want to come in and play a back three, for example. And so he's got that experience, which I think is also very important, that versatility.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good move for him, and obviously, if it works out well for him coming into that sort of consistency for the World Cup, I think yeah, credit to him. But of course, we always want him to do well and to avoid the drop to the championship. And we got a lot of Premier League players, to keep an eye on. Obviously we have to see what happens with Diego Gomez and his kind of form at Brighton. Obviously a big season for him. Diego Leon, let's see if he can actually break through into a Manchester United side that again whatever your thoughts on our Manchester United, it's still a big team, and the fact that he is being considered in the first team selection shows that Ruben Amorim is really highly rated of him. We have to see what happens to the likes of Julio Enciso and Enzo Gonzalez, like their futures. But yeah, I guess Rob, and you're an Arsenal fan, so I'm sure as much as you are keeping your eyes on your beloved Gunners, I'm sure you're also keeping an eye on the Paraguayans there. But yeah, I guess what do you expect from this season from all our Paraguayans that are there? And hey, maybe some future ones coming up as well. Because of course, this Alderete one came out of nowhere. Who's to say that it can happen? Not to say in this transfer window, but maybe in January or even after the World Cup.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've still got time in this transfer window. You never know, right? But um, I think Alderete maybe will end up with the most minutes, being the position he's playing. If he starts games, he's going to play the 90 minutes. But I assume we'd see Diego Gomez get much more minutes than he did last year. I'd be hoping he does. Brighton will have to see if they make any sales as well because they're always in the market to. I mean, they develop players to sell them, so that might give more space for Gomez to play longer. But I think they'll be the two key players we're going to see. Julio and Cesar, we don't know what's happening after his injury. I'm really surprised the way he's handling it, and he's staying in Paraguay, and he's not gone back to the UK to
He's
for
actually
recovery.
traveling. He's actually traveling back to yesterday, actually. So he's on.
Oh, okay, he did go back. Okay, because I was surprised he was there in Paraguay for that long. For Enzo Gonzalez, we really don't know. I mean, we haven't seen him for a year now. He never really got many minutes before the injury. Now, I guess it's going to be probably a slow process to get him back into that kind of level of football. So he might not get too much time. So I think and Diego Leon could get more chances depending on injury. I think he's not going to be the first choice, but he's always going to be there. And actually, the thing about Leon is he's an exciting player to bring off the bench and still have a bit of defensive balance. So you might see him in some cameo moments. But I really think looking at this current group and based on history, I think it's going to be Alderete will probably get the most minutes, and then it'll be Diego Gomez that maybe also starts a lot of games. And I'm really hopeful for Gomez that now it's his first full season that he starts to do what we saw at Inter Miami, when he just starts taking over, and he was taking over in a team with Messi, and he was being one of those key players along with Messi and Busquets. And we saw it before at Libertad, or in the national teams at different categories. He's always he gets this point where he becomes the most important player just because of his performances. So it could be a big season for him, I think.
Absolutely. And he did score the last Brighton goal of last season, so that kind of boosts off a bit of his of his confidence in a way. And obviously coming off the now with the World Cup qualifiers, where I'm sure Omar, Diego, Julio, and we'll see who else makes that team. They're going to be coming off the confidence of qualifying for the World Cup, so I think that's going to hopefully boost them up a bit more. But yeah, I'm excited. It should be a really fun season. We'll see what happens in the Libertadores next week, and of course, as we always, keep it up with the Clausura and the Copa Paraguay as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision for myself, Roberto Rojas, and Ralph Hanna. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.